Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Pikewitz. I'm also a UCLA grad 2 years ago, and I'm also one of the conference chairs, and I work in UCLA's Office of Information Technology. So welcome to the panel discussion with Jonah Peretti and our 4 student moderators.
And who here has heard of the Huffington Post? Okay, it's a lot of you. Who here has heard of Buzzfeed? Who here has heard of neither of those 2 companies? Wow, it's okay. If it's an exchange student, maybe somebody hasn't, maybe they've been in Bolger Hall for a few years away from the internet. Jonah is truly a very unique and special man, both professionally and personally. As the co-founder of Huffington Post was truly the most significant and important newspaper in a digital-only world after the advent of the internet. It became the most reputable, most trafficked site with 28 million unique visitors. And Jonah and his co-founders, Arianna Huffington and Ken Lehrer, sold that company for over $300 million to AOL. But Jonah wasn't nearly done yet. He went on and thought deeply about how to make a piece of content viral, how to look at the quantitative and the statistical analysis to figure out how you can take a piece of content, make it go everywhere on the internet. And he started a new company called Buzzfeed. And now the $300 million that he sold the company for, Huffington Post previously, looks like a small piece as he's raised over $300 million for this company. The most important new media brand since the most important new publishing brand, having raised funding from Andreessen Horowitz, some of the most significant investors in the country, a current valuation of $1.5 billion, rumored to have turned down $1 billion from Disney. Jonah is going to keep going.
That was a great introduction, Eitan. Now I'm going to introduce our students. So when Eitan confirmed that he could participate at the conference, he requested if he could do a fireside chat kind of format with some of the UCLA students, and we thought that was a great idea. So we had a contest, and we used our network to extend an invitation to students to apply to this contest. We had dozens of applicants, and we asked them to submit a YouTube video explaining what can we do to close the gender gap in technology, and also we asked them to ask 3 questions that they would ask to Jonah today, and today they'll have the opportunity to ask him some of those questions. So our 4 winners are seated right next to me. We have Tapasya Trivedi. She is a second-year undergrad studying neuroscience, and she plans to get an MBA after graduating college and work in the healthcare industry. Then we have Samantha Malari. She is a second-year undergrad studying international development studies and applied linguistics. She's also a film and video editor for UCLA Studio 22. And she hopes to continue editing films and TV shows. And she's also really hoping to apply VR programs as physical therapy for those with disabilities. And then we have, Emily McCormick. She's a 3rd-year undergrad studying music performance and communications. And she's a news reporter for the Daily Bruin. And earlier this year, she helped organize the media relations for the UN He for She conference at the YouTube space. And then finally, we have Deitra Oliver. She is our MBA student, and she currently works in international distribution and compliance matters at Esri, which is a GIS software development company. She holds a law degree from the UK and also has a BA in economics from Macalester College. So these ladies' videos really stood out. I think if we get their permission, we'll post them on our website so you get a chance to see what some of their answers were and the questions they wanted to ask him. But now just join me in giving all these panelists and Jonah a warm welcome, and we'll let them go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introductions. I'm going to take our first question from Emily, and I know she had some questions about how you really got off the ground with what you're doing now.
Yeah, Jonah, so it really sounds like everyone here knows about Buzzfeed, knows about Huffington's Post, but for those who don't maybe know the story behind it, can you talk a little bit about creating Buzzfeed and what your initial vision was in creating a company that fused technology and entertainment and editorial elements?
Sure. So I never planned to go into business. Like I wasn't someone who was like, oh, I want to do a startup. My first job out of college was I was a school teacher in New Orleans, and I was studying educational technology. I went to MIT to study educational technology and accidentally made this early viral email forward, and that made me think that something really weird had happened in media, where without a printing press, without a broadcast pipe, without anyone giving you permission, you could reach these massive audiences. And so that got me really interested in how those dynamics. I did a lot of political and nonprofit work first. Then I met Ken Lair, who was at the time unhappily retired, and then he connected me with Arianna Huffington. We started Huffington Post, and I was really focused on growth and trying to understand how to reach audiences through the internet and the unique things the internet could do that you couldn't do in television or print or other formats. And then while Huffington Post was still going, we started this little lab. I started this little lab with a small team in Chinatown in New York, and it was really just to do more R&D and research on how media spread and how the media ecosystem worked and how it was evolving. And then when Huffington Post sold, that grew into Buzzfeed and became an actual company. So when Buzzfeed started, we weren't even planning to be a company. It was more of a lab or to experiment with things. And then once I didn't want to go work at AOL, and not that there's anything wrong if any of you work at AOL, but I was trying to work out these ideas with BuzzFeed, and we started doing what was viral back in those days, which are things like cute kittens and internet memes and jokes and things like that. And then we thought we would be a small site focused on social, which would be a small subset of the media ecosystem. And then social got so big, Facebook grew so much, Twitter grew so much. All of a sudden, people were sharing news on social networks, so we started to hire reporters, and we could get into all these other kinds of content. Then more recently, video became a bigger and bigger part of what was spreading on the social web, and so we started about 3 years ago a small video team in LA, and that has now grown into more than half of our revenue and way more than the majority of our views. I recently moved out to LA, and there's 450 people now in LA, and about 1,300 people around the world. And the other sort of big trend that happened was globalization of media, where we'd make content in the US and it would spill over into Germany or it would spill over into other markets, which doesn't happen with print and broadcast. And so we started to follow where we saw people consuming BuzzFeed content and opening up offices in other countries. And now we have offices in a lot of cities around the world. So that's kind of in 4 minutes. That's sort of the story from. And so the thing about business is that what was exciting to me as someone who had been a teacher, who'd worked in research, who'd worked at nonprofits, was that when you did a good job or when something grew or when you reached your goals, you would get more resources when you had a startup. Whereas at a nonprofit, I would do something, and then at the end of it, you'd be like, oh, I got to write another grant, or I have to, start over from zero. And with startups, more talented people would join, and you could get investment, and you get revenue, and so you could keep going, and it made it possible to do bigger things and explore some of these ideas that I've been interested in for over a decade at larger scale.
So based on what you've told us already, the company has grown way more than you ever expected it to. What are your current plans for BuzzFeed, and how do you envision the company changing as we're moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change that's happened really over the last year is that we went from being a website and an app to being a distributed media company where our content appears natively on Facebook in the form of Facebook video, on Snapchat, which is now about 1 billion views a month of BuzzFeed content on Snapchat, on YouTube, and we've become a lot more global. And so a lot of what we focus on now at the company is how do we learn from each platform and then take what we learn and export it to other platforms, and how do we learn from each country that we're in and take the best of that and export it to other places. And so I think that the future is really what would a global distributed news and entertainment company look like at scale, where you're learning from everything you do and using that to get better.
So internally, has the company's culture changed at all?
Yes, I would say when I think about culture, sometimes people talk about not losing the culture of the early startup, and I think that can sometimes cause problems to think that way, because if you think about it, there's functional families and dysfunctional families, and there's functional towns and dysfunctional towns, and then there's functional metropolises and dysfunctional metropolises. And if you try to run a metropolis like a family, you're going to have a lot of problems. Or if you try, so it's like at each there's some thread that goes through it, but we try to keep evolving the culture, learning from new people who come in, learning from like when I think of the culture, I think of the cities that we're in give us culture, the internet gives us culture, our employees give us culture, and then there's a kind of unique DNA of BuzzFeed as an organization. One of the phrases that we use a lot is humble confidence, and that's something that I think has gone through every stage. We strive to have employees feel like they are confident and believe they can do big things and hard things and things that maybe people don't think they can do, but also humble, because if you're humble, you're open to the fact that you don't know everything and that you have new things to learn and new things that what you think you know might not be true. And I think also when you think about diversity and gender equality and the way that humble confidence might have a different ring depending on your background, I think it's also something where some employees might need to emphasize the humble a little bit more. Like there's some people who come from, say, a privileged background who are overly confident and not humble enough. And then there might be other people who come to work at BuzzFeed where it's reversed, where it's like, okay, you need to be more confident because you're awesome, and so focus on the confident side. You got the humble part down, but focus on the confident side. And so I think it's a nice kind of synthesis, and that's one of the things that we try to use to guide our culture.
So my question surrounds diversity and inclusion at BuzzFeed. Excuse me. I'm sure a lot of women may feel as if they need to emasculate themselves in order to feel more included in this tech or industry kind of environment. So what steps have you taken or has BuzzFeed taken to provide more of an inclusive work environment that allows people of different backgrounds to come together and feel safe in their workplace, I guess? Yeah,
I think it's obviously you've been talking about this event today, and it's incredibly important. And I think, I know earlier today you're talking about negotiating for salary, negotiating for and being confident and doing good negotiation. And I think that's great, and I think it's awesome. And I think the fact that there's differentials in how people negotiate is a problem for companies and leads to things like pay inequality. I also think, though, that organizations have to adjust for this, have to adjust too. It shouldn't just be on individual employees to learn to negotiate more or to push against the company. And what I mean by this and how it relates to your question is that I feel like sometimes there's a feeling that for a woman to succeed in business, she has one way that she has to be, which is to be a certain to be more aggressive and more assertive. And I think that that there are some women and some men who tend to be introverted, who tend to be a little uncomfortable about negotiating. And I don't think that those people should make less money, or if they're performing at the high level at their job. I don't think it's like if someone isn't stepping up and negotiating, but they're killing it at their job, a company should recognize that and pay them for performance. And I think one of the things that and it's not an easy problem to solve, but one of the things that I try to focus on at BuzzFeed is that people with lots of different backgrounds and lots of different dispositions and styles should be able to thrive and have career development. It shouldn't be that you have to fit a certain mold, a narrow mold. And when you think about the effects of things of white privilege or male privilege, and you look at how some male executives can dress poorly, for example, like wear casual clothes, like have mustard on their shirt, like have have a more flip, casual style, or maybe be more introverted, or maybe joke around more, or whatever. And it's kind of like they have the permission to do that. And a lot of women and people of color feel like if they do that, it's all of a sudden, something that is used against them, And I think that's the kind of thing that like people should be able to be themselves. I always think of it as, 80% you should be yourself, and 20% you should work on pushing yourself, or so if you never negotiate, you should probably, that should be in your 20%, negotiate and stand up for yourself more. But I think we want to create a company where people can be themselves and don't feel like when you act like yourself, it's used against you. And I think that for a lot of white men, they don't feel that, and they feel like, oh, I can be more myself. And that should be for everyone. That shouldn't just be for people who have privilege.
I saw a lot of head nodding, and I can relate to that personally. One of the things I want to ask you, though, we talked about the startup culture and sometimes the golden days, and now you're growing, and you're growing a lot and getting a lot more opportunities and interest. But the things that you're doing well, especially when we talk about diversity issues and scaling them. So maybe you can talk a bit about the data and the things that you're doing, but also sometimes the challenges when you are sort of the outlier and you're getting more outside interest. How do you actually keep a hold of what you are doing well and continue to scale that and not sort of be dissuaded by what's still mainstream, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, for sure. So Buzzfeed is a startup where we were a lab for a while. About 5 years ago, we really kicked it into gear as more of a startup and started to hire people. So in 5 years, we went from having something like 10 employees to having over 1,000 employees. And when you look at early stage startups, there's a few differences between Buzzfeed as an early stage startup and now. One thing is that when you're a startup, there's one problem is the VC world is very white and very male, and there needs to be more startups founded by women and people of color, and the people who are willing to take risks, and then also having capital that's willing to take risks on people, is an important, and that's like a larger thing, and we could bracket that, and that's something that could be a whole panel on that. Yeah. But I think early on, a lot of times startups, they don't have HR when the early stage startups. Most hiring happens through informal networks of people hiring, friends of theirs. The way that salaries are negotiated is very ad hoc, and you move very quickly. And so when I think about it in terms of Buzzfeed, it used to be the way Buzzfeed would hire is we would hear about someone who was awesome, maybe from Twitter, or maybe work they were doing, or maybe through a friend relationship. They would have a job, come and interview for a job. If a few people liked them, they'd say, oh, we want to hire this person. And oftentimes the salary and the title were, they would say, I want to be called director of social media. And you'd be like, all right, that's cool, and then you kind of be like, well, how much should we offer to pay them? And you're like, well, I think they make, $80,000, so let's pay them $85,000 and they get a raise or whatever. And so you do lots of ad hoc titles, lots of ad hoc salaries, right? And then, we recently had, and that's how kind of Buzzfeed grew and hired lots of people. This is an editorial, not a tech example, but we recently had a meeting with our new head of HR, who I was like desperately trying to find the right head of HR to take us to the next level. We hired a woman named Linka Taylor, who was worked at Google, and then before that at NBC, and before that at GE, who has been incredible. And on her third week of work, we sit down and we're doing an AMA where we just anyone can ask us questions on the edit team, and there were all these questions that were like, are women paid the same as men? Are people of color paid the same? And she's kind of and it was actually what I liked about it was that it was like two white people being made a little uncomfortable and modeling that it's okay for white senior executives to be made uncomfortable in a company. It's actually kind of good to model that. Not that I enjoyed it, but then the work to actually answer those questions required knowing like what is a director of social media as opposed to a head of this or a senior this or a junior that, and so Linka did both outside benchmarking, doing a lot of research with outside data, defining and doing leveling with jobs, so meeting with managers and figuring out, okay, what level should people be out based on their experience. Syncing that with performance management, so you have some sense of how people are performing, and then looking at looking for pay gaps or places where people aren't being paid fairly. And the result of that process allowed us to answer some of these questions, and we found that within for particular jobs, we found like a 10% discrepancy for the job, not discrepancy between men and women or whites and people of color, but just a 10% discrepancy. Sometimes it went the other way, but overall that was the level. It was less than I expected because we did have, like a lot of companies, we did have this experience where pay inequality creeps into your organization inadvertently because somebody is underpaid at another company and she says, oh, I really want to work at Buzzfeed, and you give her a $5,000 raise or $10,000 raise and she's really happy and comes there, but the other company was underpaying her and she was making less than all her male peers, and you feel like, wow, that's great, we got this amazing employee and we gave her a raise, and then you do this kind of benchmarking process and you're like, oh, she's underpaid considerably to the market, but that was something that found its way into our organization because we weren't being more rigorous. Anyway, so we went through this process and we made adjustments, and the end result was eliminating pay gaps and being plus or minus 3% for every role and job. And that wasn't doing it by race or gender. That was doing it by what job are people doing, what level of experience they have, what is their performance, and we were able to eliminate those in editorial. Now we're going and looking at the rest of the organization and trying to do a similar process. So this is kind of a long answer. It's sort of in the weeds. I don't know if people are interested in this stuff or not. But if you don't have, so for me, as BuzzFeed's the biggest company I've ever worked at, and I haven't, like a lot of company founders, have this natural aversion to bureaucracy. And as BuzzFeed gets bigger, I realize there's good bureaucracy and there's bad bureaucracy. And and maybe you shouldn't even use the word. There's good process and bad process. And if you get to a certain scale, you need to be data driven. You need to have clearer job titles and clearer leveling and clear career paths, and things need to be. You need to build good process in your organization to make sure there's no pay gaps, make sure that there's opportunity for everyone, and to do things right. And so for me, it was a kind of a growing up from small company startup to seeing how you really need to start thinking of this as a business problem the same way you would attack any other business problem, where there's nothing else we do in our business where we don't look at rigorous data and analyze it and drive towards continually improving and drive towards a good outcome. And so for things like eliminating pay gaps and driving diversity in our organization, we need to treat it the same thing as a business, as the same way we treat a business problem that we're going after, and use data however we can. I'm going a little long on this, I think.
I have a question to piggyback on that, and then I know we all have other questions here, but you talked a bit about this whole notion of white executives being uncomfortable, and maybe that's a good thing. So how do we have these conversations at work? How do we have these diversity conversations and the gender conversations? We talk a bit, if you're the only in the room, the only woman, the only black woman, the only person who maybe identifies as LGBT, you don't always want to carry the conversation. And then if you're maybe part of the larger group in the room, you may be timid of saying the wrong thing. Or is it Black Lives Matter, or All Lives Matter, or is it womanism, or is it feminism, or is it black, or is it African American? So how do you have these conversations candidly that can actually feed up to those results? So that maybe that's more of a culture thing, and I know that you bolt that in with your business metrics as well. But how do you have the conversation?
Yeah, so we're fortunate that in many parts of our organization, we're beyond the place where there's only one person from a group. And so we're now at the point where there can be disagreement within groups at BuzzFeed, right? So it's nice, the idea that like there's going to be a black opinion about some issue with BuzzFeed is fortunately not something that we have at BuzzFeed. There's multiple opinions and people who can argue about it, about things that, and I think that helps. I think the question of how to get white people to be okay being comfortable and talking about those things is an important one. And it's a touchy one because the flip side of it is you shouldn't have people of color or women feeling like they're having to do their job plus educate white men in the organization, and that it's like an extra job they have to do. On the other hand, if they don't get educated at all, like that creates another set of problems, right? So so part of it is like making that part of some people's actual job, so it's not extra work on top of it, and part of that is letting maybe in some ways modeling sometimes having me be in the uncomfortable position sometimes, or making it something where it's okay if someone says something and then realizes later that they didn't understand what they were saying or whatever. And then also I think that in general you see a lot of men or a lot of white people feel like they want to be champions of diversity. And actually this week for months, Harvard Business Review is issues on diversity. I don't know if anyone has seen that. But one of the papers one of the research thing was that saying that the results are actually worse when you have mandated diversity training and you're telling like white managers, hey, you got to do this, because then they feel like they're kind of like they're not part of the solution. They're being sort of forced to do it, and they're like being seen as kind of I don't know what you call it, but when you flip it and it's like, here's these things you can do and who's going to step up and do them, then it has a better effect. So there's some counterintuitive things where you say, oh, I want to make this change in my organization. I'm going to make it a top priority. I'm going to tell everyone to do it. And then that can sometimes have the opposite effect. And so I think it's like treating it like, again, it's like treating it like a business problem where you're actually trying to solve the problem. You're not just, sometimes this stuff gets treated through the lens of PR or gets treated through the lens of people's fears and anxieties around race or fears to talk about things. And it should be focused not on that, but on actually trying to figure out how to solve the problems and make progress. And sometimes that leads to things that are a little bit counterintuitive.
Thank you. Emily, I know you had a question on role modeling.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as someone who worked really closely with Arianna Huffington, both internally at BuzzFeed and kind of in the greater tech community, who are some of the role models who are female who you look up to, and what do you think got them to the executive positions that they're at today? Yeah,
I mean, I've learned a huge amount from working with Arianna. And I mean, she wrote a book called, I don't know if I'm getting the title right, but Fearlessness, or is this phrase, Fearlessness, and it is a very good description of her, right? It's like, and I think it takes a certain level of fearlessness to have the life she had and to start companies. And I think figuring, partly to have more women founders, you need a lot of fearlessness, because a lot of startups fail, and you need to be okay with failure. And there may be a higher there certainly probably is a higher cost for women, to fail. Like you see men fail a lot, and then still seems like it works out okay. But I think that's probably more true. I think that's actually probably more true than people would imagine for women too. It's like when people like when I'm hiring and I see someone who's started a company and the company failed, it's like, oh, they kind of know, they learned a lot of things doing that. I also invested in this company called Power to Fly, which was started by two women founders, Melina Berry and Catherine Zaleski. And Catherine I worked with at Huffington Post, and they're actually focused on solving the problem of the pipeline in tech. So they place women programmers in companies, and they also have a network of women programmers around the world that often want to work remotely. A lot of them are mothers and want to be able to spend time with their kids. And I think it was inspiring to me to see them start this company and the company's doing great, both because it's solving this larger issue and making progress on it, and because it's two inspiring women founders, going for it and building something.
Well, I guess to kind of just wind down this talk, as kind of general advice, what would you think that you as a male leader in the tech sector, what advice would you give to other male leaders to contribute to this conversation?
Yeah, I would say listen a lot, don't just talk, right? So, which is kind of ironic since I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm listening to your questions though, that counts. And treat it as a business problem. When you see tech executives say, oh, there's a pipeline problem, we're doing our best, but it's about early childhood education or whatever. It's like you wouldn't say that if it was about your core business. Like you wouldn't say, oh, we're not going to be able to hit our revenue numbers, or we're not going to be able to build new, whatever. You would try to find ways to solve the problem or to make progress on the problem. I think look for continual improvement. These things go so deep. They're about the entire world and entire culture and all these things. So don't try to, it's not like you should say, as a CEO of a company, I'm going to solve racism, or I'm going to end, pay equality in the world. You need to have realistic goals that you can achieve and focus on continual improvement, to make your own organization better. And then I think also, make sure that you give credit to the women who are doing amazing things within your own company. The stuff that I described earlier about how we looked at using data and how we did leveling and got our pay gaps to plus or minus 3% in all jobs in editorial was driven by a woman who has done just tremendous work at Buzzfeed, by Linka Taylor, who I mentioned before. And I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, and she's doing incredible stuff in the organization. And I think that it's also important to make sure that you don't if you're a male founder of a startup, you're going to get way more credit than you deserve, as your generous introduction proves. So you don't need to try to get more credit or attention or whatever, especially when there's incredible women within your company who are doing great things that are driving a lot of the success of the company.
Jonah, thank you so much. We're pressed for time, and we wanted to open it up for questions too to the audience. I know a lot of what you said landed, either for recruitment or maybe people who are thinking about retention issues. So we'd like to have a few minutes if there are questions from the audience that we could take them with Jonah.
Hello, thank you for doing this. I'm Tiffany Black with eBay. We work together. So thoughts on Arianna leaving, because that was really interesting news for me yesterday. And just overall the fact of so many things coming together, like AOL with Yahoo, with Verizon. I'm sure that played into it as well, but where do you see the Huffington Post going now with the namesake leaving, and since you were one of the founders as well?
Yeah, I think that it's exciting that she's starting a new company, which is, talk about fearlessness, you'd be in your 60s heading a giant company, that is a pretty good life and a lot of influence, and then deciding I'm going to start something with, I don't know what it was, a few $1 million, $7 million. It's just a lot of money, but it's also, compared to Huffington Post, it's like starting it over again and doing it again, and that's really challenging and hard and also exciting. So I'm excited to see what she does, and I think it's pretty cool that she's doing that. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Huffington Post. I was very happy to see Huffington Post thrive in the last 5 years when I wasn't there, because I was working really hard on Huffington Post until that point. And I think that companies can can move beyond their founders and do well, but it is hard. I think one of the things about being a founder is that you don't have to be as good of a manager, or like a professional manager that like I'm not talking about Arianna, I'm talking about myself, but you have a kind of moral authority where you can say, like, I think we should do this or that, and people are like, well, this whole company was started by this person, so maybe they know what they're talking about. Whereas when you're a hired manager, you say something and people are like, well, are they playing politics, or are they doing this, or do they care about something else, or do they really know? And really good managers have to like get their stakeholders engaged and get everything aligned the right way. And so I think one of the reasons that companies led by founders have done well, when you look at, say, public companies, is that you can cut down on some bureaucracy, you can have some kind of moral authority at the top of the company to push forward. And I think that's the thing that Huffington Post has to figure out. When someone wants to do something that would tarnish the brand of the Huffington Post but make a little bit more money, and there's not a founder there, does that just, all of a sudden do you click on a Huffington Post page and it loads some video ad that you can't click out of, and you're like, and normally that would go to Arianna. Arianna would see it and she'd be like, get rid of that now, or whatever, And so what happens is you don't have the person who can just say, this is clearly like something that's bad for the site or for the user or whatever. So
We have a few more minutes for any other questions.
I'm just curious to know what's next for BuzzFeed. Initially, when you guys started, everyone thought of it as clickbait, but we showed everyone wrong. And with journalism changing and evolving and everyone becoming a storyteller, whether that's through Snapchat or even now through Instagram stories, what's next for BuzzFeed and just the whole publishing company?
yeah, I think that you really, in a distributed environment, you really need to be on many platforms and good at a lot of different things. And I think it makes it harder for small websites, I think. We're fortunate that we got to a scale where we can really put a big team on Snapchat and invest in it, and we can do things in a lot of different countries, and we can, and once you're able to, like, let's say we do a post or a list that people love, we can turn that into a video, adapt that into a video that's inspired by it, maybe not directly adapted, but or an adaptation, not just a conversion. And that can be a big YouTube post. And then if it really works, something really works in Brazil, we can extend it to the UK. And so I think being on more platforms and more environments, it will help us. And I'm thinking about, can we expand into commerce? Could we expand into education? Could we, we just signed a deal with Warner Brothers to do a feature film. We are doing some longer form shows and series. And so I think there's other places we can expand into as well. But we more have a way of thinking. We don't necessarily have like specific goals. It's like even the stuff I said about education or it's more like I have an idea of like how we would think about what we do. And it's all about how do you connect with someone and give them something that is meaningful to share with a friend so that they build a closer connection with their friend or other people in their lives. And even with the clickbait thing, it's like a cute puppy thing was really more about connect with someone emotionally, and then when they share that with someone else, they both feel the same emotion and they feel closer to each other. And so if you think of it as a content category, you're like, oh, that's kind of clickbait, or it's not really important content. When you think of it as how do you get people to connect with each other and use the things we make to feel closer to the other people in their lives, then it starts to make more sense. And so I think some of the misunderstandings about BuzzFeed have always been that we're thinking about actual people and how they connect with each other and how they live their lives. We're not thinking about like, this is sports, this is beauty, this is news, this and so taking that same approach and spreading it internationally, spreading it to more platforms and into new areas and new businesses.
Jonah, thank you so much.
The other thing is I'm also trying to hire a chief of staff. So if anyone knows anyone good, it would be like someone to. That's my little pitch.
I'm sure you'll be flooded with applications. Thank you so much. I think it's okay to say that this panel was actually at Jonah's request rather than giving a traditional keynote, and I think it really exemplifies. I think exemplifies a lot of what he's saying, just about giving access and visibility for voices. So we thank you for that and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah,
All right.
Deetra, Emily, Sam, and Tapasya. Let's give them another really big round of applause.